Let's go to Paris now, and our global science correspondent Rebecca Morelle is there. Rebecca, where are we in all this now?
Well, it really is the last critical few hours of this. Again, last night negotiations went on into the early hours of the morning. That's the third night on the trot. But the French do think they have the basis of a document that will go on to form the final agreement. But there's a bit of a long road ahead, actually. That's going to be handed out in about half an hour. And at the moment, we simply don't know what's in there. So everyone here is just waiting to get their hands on that document. But then basically every country has to have a look at it and agree it. A quirk of this process is when these climate conferences first started up, they couldn't agree on a voting process. So as a result, every part of that agreement now has to be agreed by total consensus. If that document is agreed later on this morning, then there'll be a formal meeting later on where it's formally adopted. But again, at any point during that meeting, any country out of the 195 countries plus the EU could stand up and say, actually, hang on, I don't like that bit, and the whole thing could tumble. We don't think that's going to happen, but with these climate meetings, you never know.
Indeed. And the politics of it are fascinating and obviously very difficult for different governments. They all have different ideas and different problems. What about the science, though? I mean, how far behind the scientists are the politicians, even if there is a deal?
Well, at the moment, they are working on the basis that global warming is happening and it's a man-made phenomenon. That's the kind of starting point of these entire negotiations. But one point that's been a major issue of contention here is how ambitious should a deal be? So should we try and limit global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius? Scientists say if we go above that, we enter into a phase of dangerous climate change. Or should we be more ambitious and try to go for 1.5 degrees Celsius rise above pre-industrial levels? And that's really important for the smaller island states, because even though it's half a degree's difference, they say that's the difference between their country being underwater or not. We think at the moment the text probably is going to have a reference to both 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees Celsius, a recognition that we should try and keep temperatures underneath that, but also that we should aim for, we should recognise that 1.5 degrees Celsius is even better. But if the mechanisms then aren't in the text to achieve that temperature limit, well, then that's a real problem. And some scientists here are saying, well, it doesn't look ambitious enough to actually get to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Well, that's going to be nigh on impossible unless we totally give up on all fossil fuels within the next 10 years, which, to be honest, probably isn't going to happen.
And just one final point. In terms of the big debate about who's responsible for what, I mean, you can see it presumably both ways, that developing and developed countries have different interests. People pointing the finger at the United States saying, look what you did in the past. On the other hand, places like China and India are really kind of in between the developing and the developed world, aren't they?
This has just been an issue that has run through this entire conference, and it runs through every bit of this document too, you know, from ambition down to finance. So, you know, is this idea, should the burden really be on developed countries who previously, historically, have emitted the bulk of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere? Should they be the ones who do something, do the most about it? And previously, when these climate conferences started up, you might remember the Kyoto Protocol. Well, the onus then was just on developed countries to actually do something. But now, you know, the world has changed. Developing countries now emit 65% of all greenhouse gas emissions. China is the world's biggest emitter. India is the world's third biggest emitter. Yet they say, look, you know, we're still trying to develop. India especially, they say we want to get power, electricity to our people. So you can't exactly say we can't use any fossil fuels at all when you used them in the past. So I think that's been a real issue, and I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how they've reached a compromise on that in this document and whether they have actually reached a compromise.
Indeed. We'll be back later in the programme. Thanks very much, Rebecca. Rebecca Morelle there.